Not giving up on the Syrian people. We are not abandoning the pursuit of peace. We are not going to leave the multilateral field. We are going to continue to try to find a way forward in order to end this war.
For what seems like an eternity, we have heard from various politicians and pundits how America is slipping in its prestige around the world. More than perhaps even prestige, it's most important about the ramifications of a foreign policy that at times seems to be made up on the fly. The world is changing around us, and far too often there are those who believe we are allowing the ground beneath our feet to shift in a manner that would leave us in a dangerous position, some of which perhaps already fact in our immigration stance at home and our military position abroad. Whomever becomes the best and the next president will undoubtedly shape America's appearance to their own liking. And whether it's Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, there are trepidations to be had with both. Our guest is former co-chairman of the U.S. Department of State Public-Private Partnership for Justice Reform in Afghanistan, a former U.S. representative to the United Nations General Assembly, former senior advisor to Mitt Romney, now the author of While America Slept, digging deeper into what exactly that new commander-in-chief will face. Let's welcome Robert O'Brien to America Talks Live. Robert, thanks so much for being here. And in light of what we just heard Secretary of State John Kerry say about what is happening in Russia, the United States suspends the partnership with Russia trying to impose the ceasefire in Syria. Let us begin there with a very blunt question. How much longer will we allow ourselves as a nation and a government to be suckered by the Russians?
It's just an incredibly sad situation, Ed, and it's good to be with you. Look, Syria is going to go down as the albatross around President Obama and Secretary Kerry's neck. It's going to be a stain on their reputations and their legacy, as well as that of America. One of the most important things the American president has is his credibility. And when we announced a red line in Syria that if Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons on his own people, that would be the end of his regime. And then we backed off of that red line, and that red line no longer mattered. America lost credibility. It opened the door for the Russians to come into Syria. And now Lavrov is pushing Kerry around like a tourist, and they're just making a mockery of the United States of America. It's really a shame.
What is, though, the simple answer to this? Because, quite frankly, you can't just go ahead and drop a nuke on the Russians. You can't drop nukes in Syria. You can't go ahead and all of a sudden put American boots on the ground and start World War III tomorrow. So where do you start?
It's returning American leadership to a very dangerous world. And it's a great question. And there are really three ways to do it. Number one, we have to rebuild our military. What folks don't understand is that under 8 years of President Obama and defense sequestration, which he foisted on the Congress, the American military has been decimated. And our friends have seen it, and it makes them nervous and concerned about America's ability to stand by them. And our adversaries, the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese have seen it, and they've taken great liberties. Russia's in Syria, they're in Ukraine, they've stayed in Georgia, they've stayed in Moldova, they're threatening the Baltics, they're threatening Poland. China is on the move in the Pacific. Iran is having their way across the entire Middle East. And so we've got to reverse defense sequestration. Number two, we've got to stand by our allies and let our adversaries know that if they attack or threaten our friends, that we'll stand by them. And three, we've got to rebuild the American economy so that we can afford to pay for the military that's so important to us maintaining our role in the world.
Robert, let me come up with a fourth one in there. Is it possible that we need to start being honest with ourselves with what is happening? And I say that in light of this. Russia has now put an advanced anti-missile system in Syria for the first time. Now, last time I checked, the Islamic State does not have aircraft. They don't have a navy. They don't fly. Is there any doubt whatsoever that this is Russia putting missiles on the ground and saying, it's at you, the United States, it's at you, NATO. We are thinking that you're coming after us, and we've got to be serious, and we've got to understand this is a threat, no matter how you slice it?
No, we've been playing this game of, and the administration's been doing it. It started out in the last campaign very heavily when Governor Romney criticized President Obama on Benghazi, and you had, the made-up story of the video and the disturbance, and there was no terrorist attack on the consulate. Of course, they knew at the time it was false. Secretary Clinton knew at the time it was false, and yet Susan Rice went out with that. We can't describe our adversaries that are killing people in San Bernardino, California, close to where I live in Los Angeles or Orlando or New York or New Jersey or Chattanooga or Fort Hood. We can't describe them as Islamic extremists. So we've got to play this game that, you know, they're the other guys or something. We can't, you know, be honest that the Iranians are building an archipelago of terror from Hezbollah and Lebanon all the way through Syria to Yemen with their Houthi proxy allies. And we can't stand up to the Russians because remember that was Secretary Clinton and President Obama who had the historic reset with Russia. So we're not being honest with ourselves. And look, our allies see this and it worries them, and they're very concerned. So, you know, unless you can identify your adversaries, it's pretty hard to come up with a strategy to deter or defeat them.
So then let me get down to your book, While America Slept, because this all talks about, and what you've just mentioned here, restoring American leadership to a world in crisis. It's a great title. But then again, I'm going to have to come back and ask again, where do we start? You've touched on a lot of the simple things here, but what does the next president of the United States have to do in order to bring us back to an even footing?
Very quickly, in the inaugural speech, President Trump or President Clinton should say that defense sequestration is over and that we're rebuilding the military. That happened, by the way, under Jimmy Carter. I mean, Jimmy Carter, for as weak as he was and as terrible a president as he was, he's gotten a bad rap by folks comparing Obama to Carter because at least when the Russians, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, Carter came out and said, I've been naive. And he started the defense buildup that became the Reagan buildup. He recognized his mistake. This president will never admit to a mistake. And so the first thing the president needs to do is reverse sequestration, start rebuilding the military. The second thing that I think he or she should do is get on Air Force One. And instead of flying to Ottawa or Mexico City or London, the traditional first foreign stop for an American president, Mr. Trump or Secretary Clinton should get on the plane and fly to Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv and should drive up to Jerusalem and meet Prime Minister Netanyahu in his office in Jerusalem and send a message to the entire Middle East that America is back to standing with our allies. And that message will reverberate beyond the Middle East, Ed. It'll go to the Baltics and Poland and Romania and Taipei, Taiwan and Tokyo, Japan. Folks will start to realize around the world that America is back in the business of standing by its allies.
15 seconds. Americans need to care more about foreign policy, don't they?
We have to. It's an extraordinarily dangerous world, and the terrorists are coming here, and the Russians are on the move in Europe. The Chinese have adopted vast swaths of the Pacific Ocean as like a domestic lake. All of this will impact America if we don't restore our leadership to the world.
Care about it, people. The book, once again, is While America Slept, now available and necessary for you to understand foreign policy and the people who manage it. Robert O'Brien, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
You also. Thank you very much. J.D. Hayworth is coming up next as America Talks Live continue. Rock on, true believers. We are toast. But as the VP candidates launch themselves into the fray that is our POTUS season, and we are fearful of what they and their bosses may deal America. We remember that on this day, many years ago, a launch of a different kind created ripples of fear across this country, led us into a race where we showed just how we respond to challenges. It's the American moment.
He had served in 2 wars and flown over 150 combat missions. But in just 60 seconds, this Marine Corps officer would experience a ride like no other. At 9:47 a.m. on the 20th of February, 1962, Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn Jr. of New Concord, Ohio, found himself sitting on top of an Atlas VI rocket filled with 600,000 pounds of fuel. At liftoff, 360,000 pounds of thrust hurled the massive rocket and its occupant into space and America's history books. John Glenn became the 4th human being to enter space and the first American to orbit the Earth. For his remarkable heroism, President Kennedy awarded Colonel Glenn NASA's Distinguished Service Medal.
As our knowledge of this universe in which we live increases, may God grant us the wisdom and guidance to use it wisely. Thank you, Colonel.
Glenn went on to become the United States Senator from Ohio, and in 1984 ran for the Democratic presidential nomination, but lost to Walter Mondale. You're watching An American Moment on Newsmax TV.